Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus and his disciples left from there and began a journey through Galilee, but he did not wish anyone to know about it. He was teaching his disciples and telling them, "The Son of Man is to be handed over to men, and they will kill him. And 3 days after his death, the Son of Man will rise." But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to question him. They came to Capernaum, and once inside the house, he began to ask them, "What were you arguing about along the way?" But they remained silent. They had been discussing among themselves on the way who was the greatest. Then he sat down, called the 12, and said to them, "If anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all." Taking a child, he placed it in their midst, and putting his arms around it, he said to them, "Whoever receives one child such as this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me receives not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Last week in the Gospel, we heard about Jesus' radical call to his disciples that the life of a disciple is not easy. It's about accepting the cross. It's about picking up the cross and walking daily, and we know that cross leads to happiness. It leads to joy. As we look to the Lord on the cross each week and the beautiful image of Christ on the cross, we know that the Good Friday wasn't the end, it was Easter Sunday, the great joy of resurrection. And so when we accept our cross and begin to carry it as Christ's disciples, Jesus now goes the step further of what's the attitude of a true disciple. And he gives us the example of a child. He gives us that beautiful image of a simple, innocent, pure child. And we hear after he has given this mandate to pick up the cross, the disciples are quarreling with one another. Who's the greatest one? Who's the top dog in their group, right? And who can be the greatest disciple? And Jesus knows them, and he calls them out on it. It's not about being the greatest. It's not about the power. It's about service. It's to serve. John Paul II summed this up very beautifully when he spoke to a Marian Congress. And he said, "He took a child and put him in the midst of them." Jesus' unusual act, recorded in the gospel just proclaimed, comes immediately after the warning with which the teacher urged his disciples not to desire power, but service. This teaching must have cut the 12 to the quick, for they had discussed with one another who was the greatest. It could be said that the teacher felt the need to illustrate such a demanding teaching with the eloquence of an act rich in tenderness. He embraced a child who, according to the standard of that time, counted for nothing, and as it were, identified himself with the child. "Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me." Just a couple weeks ago, I was at my niece's first birthday party. It's her number one big birthday party, and besides being the cutest niece in the entire world, it's just amazing how the child can bring a joy to a room. Watching her and all of her daycare friends at my sister's house, they were all just playing, trying to figure out how do we walk from room to room? How do we crawl? What are these blocks all about? You know, am I the first one in the little ball pit? You know, all those kind of things. And you watch a child, we've all had this experience, you watch a child and you can't help but smile. You can't help but be filled with joy. You can't help but have some kind of peace that comes over you, that anything that's ailing us or taking, us away from joy just comes right back in the eyes of a child and who they are. And that's who we're called to be as disciples. We're be called to be the childlike, not the childish, the childlike. We are called to bring that peace, to bring that joy, to bring that happiness, to bring that smile to all those that we meet. The great commandment, as we heard in that first opening prayer of Mass, is to love God and to love our neighbor with that simple, innocent, and pure love. We should never doubt ourselves to be the childlike, the ones who are called to bring happiness, the ones who are called to bring joy in a world that today is desperate for joy, a world that is desperate for peace, a world that is desperate for hope and for true love. And so as we continue on learning who we are as Christian disciples, accepting the cross and carrying it with joy, and bringing that same joy to others, we simply hear from a quote from Mother Teresa that sums it all up. She says, "Spread love everywhere you go. Let no one ever come to you and not leave happier."